Hello and welcome to my channel Mostly Florals. In today's video I'm going to show you how to paint this gorgeous bunch of beautiful watercolor florals in Procreate. For today's illustration I'll be using a canvas size of 4950 pixels by 3900 pixels and a lovely set of colors with a hint of vintage tones. I'll leave a link in the description box below where you can download both the color palette and the outline for this artwork for free. Here's my blank canvas and I have my sketch layer ready, which I'm going to keep turned on. I'll be using the sketch layer as a reference. Since watercolor has a loose and free-flowing style, you don't need to stick strictly to the sketch. For example, with the main flower, I'll try to stay within the composed area, but paint it loosely without following the exact outline. However, for the leaves, I'll stick to their exact shape. Now I'll do a 2-finger tap on the sketch layer to reduce its opacity to around 12%. Then I'll start painting on the draw here layer. For today's watercolor illustration, I'll be using Glanz's Aqua Real brush set, which includes watercolor canvas textures as well. I'm using the chiffon canvas for this piece. However, you can always follow along with Procreate's default watercolor brushes, any brush you prefer, or even some free watercolor brushes available online. I'll start with the big rose flower using this lovely blush pink shade. I'm beginning with a small swirl in the center like this, and then continuing with simple, easy petal shapes. There's no fixed pattern, there's no right or wrong way to do it. It just takes a bit of practice, especially if you're a beginner. So just feel free to create the petals in any way you prefer. All you have to do is just keep building on this until you reach the outermost outline of the flower. As you can see, I'm not strictly following the reference petal outlines. I'm keeping the strokes loose and building the petals as I go. As you build the flower, just make sure the petals gradually get a bit thicker, similar to how they would in a real rose. have finally finished painting the flower and it looks pretty sweet, just the way I envisioned it. Now I'll go to the color wheel and select a more saturated shade of the same tone. And using the Bloom Accents brush, I'll be adding some darker shades to the rose, focusing on the inner parts of the petals like this. Now this is something I really enjoy doing. Adding shades makes such a big difference to flat tone flowers. It helps them look much more lively and complete. Now I'll use the blend tool, making sure it's set to the wet blending brush with the brush size at about 8%. After alpha locking the flower layer, I'll gently blend these areas. The nature of this watercolor brush is that it creates layers every time I lift the brush from the screen, so blending helps smooth them out and makes the flower look neater. I'm only blending the obvious lines and areas while still keeping the darker saturated tones intact. Now, using an even more saturated shade from the color wheel and the Bloom Accents brush, I'll alpha lock the layer and add some shading starting from the center of the flower. Ideally, I want the center to be darker, just like in natural roses. I won't be adding this to the outer petals, only focusing on the middle area. Now, using two lighter shades, I'll add some highlights to the outer petals. First, I'll select a very light shade from the same color family, and using the Bloom Stamp brush, I'll add some splotches like this. Then I'll repeat the process with a slightly darker shade to create more depth. Now that I'm done with this rose, it looks perfect to me. Next, I'll open a new layer and place it below the flower layer to start painting the leaves one at a time. I like to keep all my elements on separate layers. It's much more convenient if I need to make edits later, just in case. For the leaf, I'll start with this lovely green shade and use the all-rounder brush to paint directly over the sketch, filling in the inside like this. Now I'll open another new layer and do the same for the second leaf as well. I'm adding paint to random spots on the leaves like this, which gives them a beautifully imperfect look. After blending, it creates a finish that's much closer to traditional painting. Now using the blend tool, I'm going to gently blend this to give it a smooth and lovely finish. There's another similar looking leaf here, and I'll do the exact same thing as before to paint this one too. Now that the base layer is done, I'll begin adding shades and highlights. I'll select a saturated tone from the same color family, and using the big wash brush, I'll alpha lock each and every leaf layer one at a time to add the shadows like this, starting from the bottom. Now I'll use a lighter tone to add some highlights to all the leaves. Here I'm also using the blend tool to soften the edges a bit while still keeping the different shades intact. Using a yellowish green shade and then a lighter shade, I'll select the Bloom Blotch stamp to add some extra details to the flowers, giving them a more vintage look. And once again, I'll be using the blend tool to soften the edges of the blotchers a little bit. Switching back to the all-rounder brush and selecting a darker tone, I'll add some veins to the leaves. These details really make the leaves look complete and lovely. Using a lighter tone and the sketching and detail pencil, I'll add a few highlights and details to the leaves. This pencil really gives the leaves a nice pop and enhances their sharper features. A good alternative to this pencil is Procreate's HB pencil, which works perfectly well too. Now that I'm satisfied with all the leaves, I'll merge the layers. Next, let's remove the shadow that's appearing through the flower. This happens because of the transparent nature of the watercolor brush, causing the leaves to show through. We don't want that, so to fix it, I'll go to the leaf layer and use the selection tool with the freehand option. I'll select the area I want to remove like this, then swipe with 3 fingers on the screen and choose cut and paste. This will move the selected area to a new layer, and from there you can simply delete the layer. A big thank you to Sarah, who shared this trick in the comments of my previous video. I had been manually erasing these bits before, so her suggestion was incredibly helpful. Now in a new layer, I'll start painting this rusty lavender flower. Selecting a slightly saturated tone from the same color family and using the Bloom Accents brush again, I'll alpha lock the layer and add some darker hues here. Switching to the blend tool, I'm blending the shades once again to enhance the watercolor effect. Using a lighter tone and the sketch pencil, I'll add some details to this flower to finish it off. I'll also add a few splotches using the Bloom Stamp brush. As an alternative, you can use saturated tones to add some color and then blend them for a softer effect. I'm happy with how this looks, so now I'll move on to painting the stem and sepal of this flower, starting with a forest green shade. I'll also be using the sketch pencil here with the same color to sharpen the details of the sepal. Switching back to the Bloom Accents brush and a lighter tone, I'll be adding some highlights and then I'll use the blend tool to soften them up. Essentially, these steps will be repeated for all the elements: the base layer, highlights and shadows, blending, and finally topping it off with details using the sketch pencil. Using the all-rounder brush again, I'll paint the foliage here and continue following the same steps as before. Once I'm done adding the details with the sketch pencil, I'll use the splatter brushes to add some splatters like these. Alternatively, you can create a similar effect by painting small dots on the leaves. To paint these berries, I'll start on a new layer with simple brown lines to create the stems. Here I'm using different shades of blue to paint the little berries like this. I'm also adding a touch of shadow to the stems using a saturated tone. The reason for adding so many highlights and shadows is to make the watercolor painting look as close as possible to a traditional piece of work. In a new layer, I'll start painting these flowers using a lovely blue shade. First, I'll fill in the base color for all the little flowers. Here I'm using a saturated tone to add a darker border and define the flower center. And here I'm using the sketch pencil again to add details and make the petals more defined. Now I'll continue adding more details, highlights and shadows. Since these are my basic steps, I'll follow the same process to paint the rest of the elements, more or less using the same techniques. Follow along and let's complete this therapeutic watercolor painting together. Here's the completed watercolor florals painting in Procreate. I hope you enjoyed watching this. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel and tap the notification bell so you're notified every time I post a new video. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram for more art-related content, tips, tricks, and behind the scenes and other updates. Take care and happy creating!